everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. On today's episode, we are having a lovely lady who is joining us from a philanthropic organization that deals with philanthropy and government. And I'm very excited to learn about her work from Convergence Partnership. So welcome Amanda Navarro, the Executive Director of Convergence Partnership. How are you today, Amanda?
Good. Happy to be here with you, Jessica.
I'm so excited for this. I know we had a little talk previously just so that I could learn a little bit more about Convergence. And when I heard about the work that you're doing with Convergence, it was like a song for my soul, I'm going to say, because the podcast that I have is called Philanthropy. And when I started it, I had to kind of navigate the explanation of why I chose the term philanthropy. And then when I started talking to you and you indicated almost the exact same definition of philanthropy, I was really excited about that. So can you tell me a little bit more about philanthropy and government and Convergence Partnership, how this began?
Yeah, sure. Well, Convergence Partnership is entering its 19th year. I have been a part of Convergence 18 of those 19 years, and it has been quite a beautiful journey, and we're still going. And Convergence Partnership started with a small group of healthcare systems and national foundations that were all finding themselves in the same spaces, at the same conferences, having the same conversations. And at the time, back in 2007, the sort of national discussion and focus was around childhood obesity epidemic. And that's when the funders really came together, and the impetus was, what can we do together that we can't do individually in our own institutions? And that was really the impetus for coming together in a funder collaborative. And so we had several other foundations join us over the years. But the funder collaborative is one that is working to transform systems and policies to be racially just, inclusive, and support community health and well-being. And the way that we really approach our work is we've always centered health and equity in all of our work, and not just sort of the outcome of the work, but how we actually approach the work, who we fund, how we fund it. It's all through an equity and justice lens. And we believe, and we are envisioning, and I know this is a really important and challenging time for us, but I do believe there is this possibility of us envisioning a just and inclusive society where all people, especially those most impacted by structural racism, are empowered to shape the decisions that are being made that impact our lives every day. And we are actually one of the only funder collaboratives that is working at that intersection of health equity and racial justice. And for us, it's not just a belief. There's so much evidence that shows that people can only reach their optimal health and well-being, spiritual, body, mental, when actually you can remove barriers, structural barriers, to be able to live your life, to be able to receive the supports and services, to be in community with other people. So we really do believe strongly that at the very grounding of our work is really ensuring that we can promote equity and also promote a broader sense of well-being for people so that they can thrive and flourish.
That's so amazing. And I feel so empowered just hearing the work that you're doing. So I'm assuming that that's why you're still there after 18 of the 19 years. What about your background? Can you tell me a little bit about your personal background and how you felt compelled to take on this position? Was there anything in your own personal life that led to this Convergence Partnership?
Yeah, really good question. My training is in public health. And after I received my master's in public health, I decided to go for my doctorate in public health, and I focused on policy and racial and economic equity. And at the time, I really thought I was going to end up being a researcher and evaluator. So I worked in academic institutions. I worked in the federal government. I worked at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for a few years. And those two experiences were incredible growth and learning experiences. And what I really got to see was how institutions embody or don't embody these types of values, whether it's repair, healing, equity, inclusivity. And, you know, while there are very good, well-intentioned people, brilliant people in these institutions, what I got to understand was that so much of how these organizations and institutions in government are created really kind of promote a white supremacy culture that I found personally something that I did not want to perpetuate. And so I got to understand was that type of a mindset was actually really informing and influencing decisions that were being made, right? So even at, like, for example, the CDC, where grant making was going, how was grant making being approached? How were programs being approached? And so it really got me to, I think, understand how institutions have been built, how they work for certain people and don't work for others, particularly communities of color and other marginalized communities. And for me, it became a calling to transform these institutions, transform these arenas and sectors such that everybody feels that they can belong and they have the ability to have power to make change within the organizations as well as outside the organizations. So after leaving government, I went into the nonprofit sector and I worked for a action and research institute called PolicyLink that centers racial and economic justice. And that was where I started with Convergence Partnership. That was one of their projects that they housed. And that was despite the fact that the organization itself was really focused on more partnerships with government, partnerships with other nonprofits, really doing work on the ground with communities. This was sort of a bit of an outlier in the idea of organizing philanthropy. And I have found over the years just how critical this tool is in the philanthropy toolbox of collaboration and collaboratives, of being able to pool funds to maximize impact. And so all these years while we've been trying to, keep to this collaborative, really investing in meaningful, equity-focused efforts across the country, we've also gone through our pivots and resets and changes, course corrections, but I would say that those constant evolutions is what actually led to the success and has led to the success of Convergence and still being around. And for me, I believe that if we don't move at the pace of community or with community and what they need, and we don't pivot along with them, we're not doing our job. So that's why Convergence for me has always been, it can have a new take, but at the end of the day, we're still fighting for the big North Star of having an inclusive and equitable society.
Oh, that's amazing. And I mean, it really makes me feel hopeful. I do want to also point out to any of the listeners that Amanda is joining us from the United States. So she's coming from New York. And of course, we're in Canada, but we definitely experience a lot of the same of what you're saying, and I repeatedly come back to themes of racial injustice and equity and that sort of thing in Canada. So I think it's really amazing to hear of what you're doing and to think that we could have something similar happening in Canada. That would be really incredible. But I do recognize how overwhelming that could feel from time to time. And I love that your North Star is, across the board, making sure that, we're addressing, this systemic racial injustice and inequity, not just in the health sector, but everywhere at every level. But can you tell me, just if we were to break that down into small, manageable goals, what are some sorts of things that you've seen happen with Convergence Partnership to bring about some of that change?
Yeah. Well, when we went through our most recent reset in 2020, what we were really called to by our community partners is to invest in the type of sustainable, durable, organizing ecosystems at the local and state level, and for philanthropy to support that. And we are in this, again, challenging and incredible time where we are seeing people rise up. We're seeing people exercise their voice and their power to really, again, push on and against this authoritarianism and fascism, but again, coming to this vision of an inclusive and multiracial democracy. And so we're in we're a historical moment here in the United States, and I think globally too. People are rising up across the world. And so that's what gives me hope. And the way that we have been focusing on that big North Star is, one, we have focused our investments on frontline organizations in 6 places across the country. And they all vary by size, vary by constituency, vary by geography, and vary by political environments, because we truly believe that those building blocks of allowing people to organize and to use their collective power to make positive change has to happen everywhere. So we really focus our investments on that particular piece of amplifying people power. The second is we dove into narrative change, and that's our second pillar of work. Narrative change is a very big arena and a big field, and it is also become very crowded. What really got us to think about narrative change was, again, at the time, back in 2016 through 2020, and we're seeing it today, those damaging racialized narratives, harmful narratives about people, about othering people, making them less than or different as if they're dangerous. Those narratives themselves and those mindsets are what's fueling fear, what's fueling anger and violence, and we are trying to do our part to actively counteract those narratives and in place put forth stories and narratives of people that are really shifting towards inclusion and belonging and dignity for all people. And so, and that's a tall task. But one thing that we've narrowed our work in connecting the narrative piece to the civic power piece. So for us, narrative and civic power is inextricably linked. And they're connected. If you have a power to use your voice, to tell your story, to make change, that is what's going to get us to the kind of bigger systemic changes that we believe need to happen. And so through that storytelling, we've been supporting our grantees in a number of ways. We've produced our own podcasts where they get to lead and produce their own podcasts, incredible stories from across the country. And we've put out a couple reports just getting a sense of the landscape of who and how narrative change is being funded. And our second report is actually showing case studies of how you think about narrative change and use that for your storytelling. The third pillar of our work is serving as a model to transform philanthropy. How do we show up in very different ways that is more reparative? So we are doing a lot of internal work and have been doing work that centers repair and healing and racial equity. And I don't think anyone has been, especially in the philanthropic world, immune to causing harm to communities, not intentionally, but the practices of grant making and funding and that power dynamic, all those things need to be really not only examined, but undone to then build newly and create new practices. So I'll give one just very simple example, but in the importance of thinking about health and well-being, we have created, and I've been very intentional about creating space for staff, for our partners, our grantees, to use the time to have very candid, sometimes personal and painful conversations, but as a space to be able to grieve, to acknowledge pain and harm, and that acknowledgement is the first step in healing. And so that has been a huge priority for me as we continue to do this work through Convergence and with our partners, is the idea of healing and care, and how do we care for each other right now, every single day, every moment. It sounds so simple or maybe even superficial, but right now we really need to just slow down and think about, how are we caring for ourselves? How are we caring for one another? How are we caring for our communities during these times?
Oh, that's amazing. Of course, for myself, in my doctoral research, that I'm working towards difficult conversations, conflict management, incorporating spirituality. And so when you mention that you have these difficult conversations, can you take me through that a little bit more? Because I find that really fascinating, that you would put those questions out. And I'm just trying to imagine what that might look like. You know, is this with a group of coworkers? Is it with collaborators? Like, how does that work? Because I can imagine how intense that would be.
Yes, it is. And it's interesting because I think some people consider it an aside to the work, but it's the work itself. It is the work. Right. So we've done a couple of things and doing more, but just a couple examples. So we actually took some time with our funders, the members of Convergence Partnership, funding members, to go through their own kind of money journey. And what I mean by that is we partnered with Decolonizing Wealth Project, and they have published a book and guide that's called Money as Medicine. And we took time to introduce this to the funders, and we had staff from the Decolonizing Wealth Project come and work with the funders to think about, what has been your own personal journey around money? How do you think about money? How did your parents or grandparents think about money? And how has that influenced how you approach the work in philanthropy? And it was fascinating to hear all the different kinds of stories of ways in which people connect or resist the idea of money. And so just to have that open conversation really allowed the funders to see, is there a different relationship to have with money and funding that actually will promote reparation, repair, healing to community, and not one that is focused on, charity, on giving one to another. And also just, I think, dismantling this idea that, this concentration of wealth and power. There are philanthropies that are very wealthy, that have enormous endowments. And right now, what this country needs, what community needs, is for you to unleash that power, unleash that wealth, so that we really can democratize the types of processes that are necessary to protect our democracy and our well-being. And so we've done things like that internally, having conversations that change mindsets. The other thing we did was, those difficult conversations is, again, when you think about the big and the small. I mean, it could be the smallest of things or a huge change. But for us, a low-hanging fruit was changing our grant-making approach. So we went from, 5, 6, 8-page RFPs, competitive process, to now having no RFP, not having be a competition so that we're not perpetuating competition among nonprofits, but actually having conversations with organizations about what do you need? You tell us. How would you use this funding? We also went from project-based funding to general support, core support, so that communities and frontline organizations that we supported, they had the final say of where and how the funding was being used. And then for grant reporting, we didn't ask for a final report. Reports still get submitted and end up in a, well, not in a physical shelf, but in a virtual shelf somewhere, and never see the light of day. And so we removed the reporting requirement, but again, we provided to our grantees the opportunity to create a podcast episode. And we connected them with local producers of color in the communities that they are. So it was not a top down, did not come from us. It came from community, it came from peers. And so that's the type of just consistent, I would say, decolonizing of our approaches to how we typically have gone about philanthropy and funding and grant making, to undo that and then do newly. And again, that is to us a daily practice.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Let me share one other story, and just to be more specific to your question. So we had one foundation that was newer to the partnership, and we wanted to launch a year-long learning grants just to get a sense of what could these investments look like multi-year, longer term. So when we're starting the grant making, we said, okay, we are focused on grassroots frontline organizations and that are Black and Brown Indigenous led. And so everyone had their assignment. And so we went to go find these organizations. And one of the funders came back with recommendations that were their legacy grantees. And their legacy grantee was very well funded, very well resourced organization that was white led. So basically everything we were not looking for. And we were also very clear. We wanted to fund and invest in historically under or unfunded organizations. There's so many organizations that you and I know that have been doing this from their own pockets, that are out there in the community, right? And never get seen or never even have the capacity to write a grant to get the money. And we just thought, we are not going to perpetuate any of that. And so we had to have a conversation with the foundation to say, this is not who we're looking for. But what it got us to was a very productive conversation about, okay, well, what does grassroots mean? And it literally just came down to, what do we mean by that? And when we could get clear about who we wanted to support and who we were not going to support, it was sort of an aha moment for that foundation, like, oh, okay, yes, these are the groups that need the funding the most. Now, take that, I don't know, 8 years later, and that foundation has not only been successful in investing in other similar groups, they have organized foundations across the state and now launched the past couple of years have launched a $30 million equity fund for frontline grassroots organizations. Wow. And it came from one conversation about, what do we really mean? What are we really looking for? What does it mean when we say equity, right? And what are the types of groups that we need to start funding and funding differently? And it has just completely unlocked incredible work that we've seen in the 6 priority places that we're in.
Geez, that's incredible. Just amazing. And, I love that you had to really sit and get clear about, what is our purpose? What is our focus? Who are we helping? And then to be truthful with that, to share that truth, right? So that you could really do the change that needs to be done in the world. I think that's really fascinating. And I love that you're talking about people sitting there and having that conversation about money. I wish I was there. I wish I was there to be a part of those conversations, just because they would be so powerful, informative for, especially for an organization. And now that's making me wonder about the accountability and about how does Convergence be really open and transparent in their, in your funding process? How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, as I said, we removed the RFP process, and what we did was we went through an intentional process that took a few months where we relied on our local and regional funders who have greater connection to community to ask them who they would nominate or recommend for this funding. And then from there, we had conversations with those organizations. Aside from just the parameter of we're focusing on racial justice and health equity, there was really nothing else. And so this truly was for us a community leads, and we are supporting. We are in the backseat. We don't want to get in the way of what we know that these organizations know way better than any of us could tell them to do, nor would we want to. There's no proving trust. And that's one of the things that also we want to decolonize from philanthropy is there's this idea that you have to prove that you're trustworthy in your organization, which is why a lot of times EDs, directors, leads don't candidly share what their struggles or pain points are, because they think, well, maybe they're going to think like, I'm not going to get funded next year, or I'm not capable of it. And so that was, again, also something we were very conscious of not perpetuating. And so we came in with, we trust you. We know you have the answers. We do not. And we will do whatever it takes to support you. And so even the general support, the core support, that flexibility in funding for them to choose what to do, it was a game changer for so many organizations. So, and even some of the organizations, I remember a couple of the leads said, wait, are you, wait, there's no catch? Are you sure? Like they couldn't believe that this is how we were coming to them. And over the years, that has built and transformed the kinds of relationships we have with community partners and community leaders in these organizations to say, Convergence were the first ones there for us. They were the ones that trusted us to just give us the money and do what we need to do. And now we're doing things we never imagined we would be doing.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I'm going to ask a dumb question because there might be people who are listening, and also myself, because I don't actually know what an RFP is.
Oh, my apologies. Yes, very good. That is not a dumb question at all. Request for funding.
Okay.
So it's all of the, our funding opportunity announcements. So all of those announcements that go out that say, okay, new grant program from X Foundation, apply here. Oh. And then the application is 8 pages, or you've got a laundry list of questions you have to answer. And so we did not do any of that. And instead what we did was we asked the local and regional funders to submit on behalf of the organizations a letter of support. And that was it. And we were very intentional about being swift. So in 2 weeks, they had their funding and they were allowed to run with it. And so I think that what I have learned time and time again, and it's so clear, especially now, is words matter, but actions matter more. People are saying a lot of things. People are saying a lot of things that people want to hear, sound good, but their intentions don't align with those words. And so that accountability I put on ourselves, but this is something that we all need to learn in the field is having accountability for, okay, you've said one thing, but you're doing something different. Yeah. Right. And I think, unfortunately, after the murder of George Floyd and the racial uprisings, everybody was doing that. Everyone was like, yep, we're going to do this. And they were doing it, right? They were getting rid of grant reports. They were getting rid of the competition. They were doing flexible spending. And now the sector's reverted back. So I think it is a big question about how do we hold ourselves and each other accountable. And when you take into account the power dynamic, right? Grantees aren't always going to be comfortable telling their funder, hey, you said one thing, but you're doing something else, right? So for myself and my colleague, we just feel like that is our role and responsibility. And hence the conversation that we had with that funder, like, no, that's not actually what we're intending to do here. And let's work through it together. But that level of mutual accountability is so important, because right now communities don't just need to be hearing the words, they need to be seeing it in real time.
Absolutely. I mean, that just speaks to the heart of integrity, right? Aligning those words and those actions. I had a thought. Let's see if I can remember it. Sorry. Oh gosh, I'm having one of those days.
I get it.
Oh, okay. I know. I remember now.
Okay, good.
Because of course your focus is going to be more on, probably people of color, BIPOC communities. How does that factor in when we're thinking of like white allyship? And have you seen any of that? Have you addressed it? Just because I know that that's sometimes a topic here in Canada when we think of, race relations. So I'm just curious how Convergence partnership has, maybe worked within allyship or just how it impacts you really.
It's a really good question. We haven't done anything specific around allyship. However, my co-lead is a white woman. Our members are all different race and ethnicities, and including white funders. And it is something that is, as individuals, is always top of mind for those in the room about how do I show up as a true white ally. And so I would say this, as a woman of color, I can't be the one always saying these things, right? I can't be the one in front of the room trying to convince or just get people exposed to this idea of why we have to address racial barriers and systemic racism, because it impacts all of us, including white people. And so when we can understand that and see that racist policies, and we're seeing it here, racist policies impact everyone. When you see immigration policies that are so oppressive and discriminatory and dangerous, right, that's impacting everybody. And so that is something that I think we've have a very strong collective consciousness around. But knowing that, again, coming back to, I can't be the only one as a woman of color, right? And there are many times where I'm burnt out, I'm tired, I don't want to be the one. And the reality is that when a white person can talk with authenticity around these issues to other white people, that has an impact and can open up conversations that may not necessarily open up if I was leading them. So I need white allies. We need white allies. And there are very clear ways of how to embody or show up as a white ally. And I would say for anyone that's interested in that, there are many books, there are incredible courses, programs to be able to bring greater consciousness to that. And what I would say through Convergence, In thinking about that particular question, one way we addressed it was typically when it comes to these funding opportunities, the grantees are offered what's called technical assistance, right? Well, the funders are the ones that have chosen the technical assistance providers. And a lot of times those providers are not connected to community, are not representative of the communities that we're serving or working with, and also potentially have had some historical relationship with these organizations that has not been supportive. So rather than imposing who we think would be technical assistance providers to our grantees, we said to them, you choose who you want to work with. If you want an evaluator, bring in an evaluator. If you want someone to bring advocacy expertise, bring in who you want. And many times they were white-led organizations that have, the policy advocacy organizations that have the big firms that have all that kind of expertise. But the communities got to choose, not us. And that makes a big difference. So I would say that there's a huge need for all of us to show up in this work, and for white allies to follow the lead of Black and Brown and Indigenous BIPOC communities. That is the best way to show up.
That's really awesome. And then I was thinking, of course, I feel like I know how you'll answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just because I'm curious and I want to hear your stance on this question. But sometimes I hear people say, I don't look at people as whatever race, color, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't see it. And what are your thoughts on that when people make that declaration that they are colorblind, they don't see color, they only see human to human? What are your thoughts on that?
Problematic. The long and short of it.
Thank you. I had a feeling you would say that.
Yeah. Problematic because I think that is the code for I'm just not going to go there. That's what it feels like. Yeah. And you saying that actually erases who you're seeing as who I am, part of my identity.
Right.
So that is, as a Mexican American woman, I absolutely want you to be able to see my Mexican roots and my traditions and my language and all of that. And so I don't believe that anyone is colorblind. And actually, again, doing the internal work, we all carry biases. Yeah. All of us. And the majority of them are implicit biases. And we can go our whole life and not really be conscious of those implicit biases, but they're there. And so to me, it's a cop out. Yeah. And what really needs to happen is to actually lean into what are my biases? What happens when I walk down the street and I see a group of young boys? What do I think when I see a homeless person? That is the type of consciousness that, again, the decolonizing our minds and how we've been raised into these ways of being that don't serve any of us. Mm-hmm. So I would say that for those that I think are relying on being colorblind, it's offensive. It takes away from the whole person that's in front of you. And it's something to celebrate and acknowledge, not to ignore or dismiss.
I agree. Thank you. I think that was a very well thought out response, and I really appreciate it, because my response typically is, must be nice.
Yes, exactly. right?
To have
Yep.
that kind of privilege that you don't get to see. Race is not a factor for you.
Yep.
But really, I do think that being able to embrace people exactly as they are and celebrate them for their diversity is the goal that we need to have in society, instead of shaming people for their color or their differences, but to uphold people and say, you know what, thank you. Thank you for being different from me, because you help me to grow as a human, to think outside of the box. Exactly what you said, those biases that we are not confined to, but often raised in because of culture, because of whatever our family dynamics are, and what countries we may come from. All of those things are going to influence us and impact us in some way, shape, or form. But those shouldn't be the things that keep us from connecting to others. And we should be able to, look at these and look at people who are different from us and say, okay, what can I learn from you? Because you're so different from me, and I love that, because I've maybe been raised in too narrow of a mindset. Maybe my heart needs to be opened a little bit more and to be a little bit bigger, like the Grinch. And so thank you for being here and really recognizing that. I know for myself that when people say, oh, I'm colorblind, I'm like, ooh, this is gonna be an uphill battle.
Yep.
But, that being said, I was a little bit curious when I was thinking about the different groups and organizations that you might be funding. Of course, if they are coming from, various backgrounds, and you mentioned, we're all in some state of decolonial deconstruction. So how do you recognize or see or support that work? Because I know people are at different levels of that decolonialism, and some people, unfortunately, maybe don't know any other way at this point. They haven't even wrapped their heads around it, and they're going through the motions of colonialism. Because I know from my personal experience as as a teacher, as a principal, I've had people, who come from, indigenous backgrounds, minority backgrounds, and, sometimes it's easier, they think it's easier to go through the motions and accept a colonial narrative. And then for me as a leader to say, hey, wait a minute, let's have a conversation about that. So when we think of Convergence Partnership, how do you go about that with supporting these different groups?
Yeah, I would say we move at the pace of community and with community. We never got ahead of community. And so, for example, we funded organizations that varied in not only their scope, their focus, their issues. So we've funded organizations that are working on transportation justice issues. We have supported organizations that are focusing on old housing stock and lead poisoning and lead abatement, and using community health workers as an advocacy base for advancing lead prevention and healthy homes. And we're in other organizations, and particularly in places, this is why the place piece is so important. We fund in California, Louisiana, Missouri, and Kansas. Those are the 4 states. And then the 2 large metro regions are Chicago and Buffalo. And each of them have their own stories and their own history. And each of them have their own narratives that they're having to challenge and confront, damaging narratives. And so that was where we really started, was, what are the kinds of dangerous, damaging, harmful narratives that you're having to confront in your work, and where are you starting? So in a place like California, while the majority of it is blue, there are still red pockets of very conservative thinking, very conservative policies that have caused great harm to a lot of migrant and farm worker families. So we're trying to change that mindset and that narrative there. And we've been working with an organization, supporting an organization there that really advanced a huge educational campaign around proposed transportation policies that were effectively defeated just by using community voice. In places like Kansas, for example, where they started was, we just need to come together to address racial divisions. People don't talk with one another. They're trying to fight against just hate and division. And so for them, it started with community conversations. It started with creating a community hub and space to hold those conversations. They even created coloring books for children and adults, but to just get a sense of who are leaders in historical leaders, but also who are leaders in our community. It could be your uncle. It could be your sister, your neighbor, all ways that we can actually change the way that we see people, and that we see people as leaders and change makers and not as people that we need to fear. And that's where they started. So we started where they were starting. And that's why we have been focusing on the idea of what are those building blocks to get to that strong organizing infrastructure where coalitions are all together and can move and organize on a massive front and through movements. But we have to start where community is starting. And so that's what we did. And it looks very different in different places, but that's what it's meant to look like, is different in different places.
Oh, thank you. That's such a very thoughtful and wonderful answer, really, and really just highlights the levels of support that you're able to provide through your organization, which is really amazing. We are... Actually, I know it's been just an easy breezy ride, and I knew it would be. I could probably talk for 2 more hours.
Exactly. I was just going to say.
But I'm wondering if there's anything that, we haven't talked about that you felt I should mention this before we go, just because I know I've kind of been leading the questioning, but I know if I haven't hit on some of the topics, I definitely want you to have the space to share anything that's on your heart.
Oh, thank you. I think we've covered so much and just really appreciate this conversation, and will be taking it with me to nourish me the rest of the week and month. And I would just say, for those that are listening and are interested in philanthropy, but specifically funder collaboratives, this is, again, a very powerful tool and vehicle that we have to move resources, move support to organizations that desperately need it right now. And Convergence Partnership is one of those collaboratives, and would love to hear from you or work with you. So check us out at www.convergencepartnership.org. And I really look forward to hearing from anyone that's out there listening.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for your brilliance, your advocacy, the amazing work that you're doing and that you've done and you continue to do. I think that's just incredible. And I love that you're so community focused. I guess I do have one more question before we go, just because when I think of Philanthropy, my podcast, I know that what I really love to nurture and support in others is that self-care piece, because I always want people to go out into the community and to do that good philanthropic work from, their heart center, and not always the financial place, if they're not able to, but to do that community work. But, I know you touched a little bit on it earlier about the self-care piece. And I'm curious for yourself, you've gone through this process for 18 beautiful years, and you're still here even after COVID and all of the stuff that continues to go on in the US. How do you take care of yourself? How do you nurture your spirit, your emotional, mental, physical well-being so that you can continue to do this amazing work?
Really good question. It looks like different forms. So for me, in COVID in particular, I took up cooking. I love to cook. And in particular, I love to cook for people. So, since I was a baby, a little girl, I can remember beautiful memories of my family at, 20 of us, 30 of us at a big table, having enchiladas, mole together. And I've always wanted to have that kind of a space to nourish people and take care of them. So cooking for me is not just about myself and doing some fabulous recipe or something like that, but it's more for the joy comes in giving that nourishment to others. I am blessed, and I think it comes with years. When you think about community, who is your community? Like, who are your people? And I am truly blessed with people around me that bring that level of not just giving and care, but there's just something about feeding each other's souls and working through the pains of this work, but also finding time to laugh, have a lot of dance parties. And all night chats. And so that sense of support around me is what lifts me up every day. And then the last thing I'll say is my beautiful nephews. I have 3 nephews and a baby niece who all live within walking distance of me. Aww. And I get to spend so much time with them. And when you get to see through a child's eyes just pure joy and happiness and love, that's always a reminder that I need. Just every day is just bring joy and love to whatever you do. And kids can really help remind us of that.
That's so beautiful. And clearly, all of these amazing things that you're doing towards nurturing yourself have been able to sustain you so that you can nurture all of this good and amazing work in the community. And I celebrate you for that. That's really incredible and really inspiring. I hope that's a message that many people take away when they listen to this, that there are amazing people in this world, and that really makes it feel like a safer place, like a place with more love and hope. And so I'm so grateful we got to have this conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was phenomenal. And I'll have to say this because I just want to make sure too. There are days that I do not want to lift my head up from the pillow. And, there are moments where all I can do is sit in my chair and have a good cry, or, not look at the news for the day. Those are all things too that are important. It's not every day is going to be one we're going to be like, yeah, we're ready to go out there and fight. This is for the long haul, right? And this is a marathon. And so making sure that you are taking time to rest, to repair physically, emotionally, spiritually, in whatever way you can, is what's going to sustain us and keep us going in this fight.
Oh, I love that. That's just such a grounded and honest perspective that you're definitely considering the balance that, sometimes you're right. It's not sunny days, but it doesn't mean we quit or give up. We maybe just need to change our approach and learn that it's not even a setback. It's just maybe a pause and a reset before we continue. And so thank you for sharing that, because I think people need to hear that. Sometimes it's so easy to, I guess, maybe become overwhelmed. And so it's good to hear that honest perspective from somebody who does the work. Oh, lady, this has been so amazing. I'm so grateful.
Likewise. I feel my cup is full. My cup is full.
Me
so
too.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda. And of course, you shared your website, www.convergencepartnership.org. So if people are curious about any of the work that you do and some of the success stories, I know a lot of that information will be on your website, and they can reach out to you there too. Thank you so much for your time and all the good work that you're doing in this world.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You have a wonderful day, my dear.
You too. You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.